Stuff. Thank you, Claire. Well, I'm glad we've got both Claires on the case here, otherwise we'll be all over the place. Right. Okay, so I will minimize my little self because no one needs to look at themselves. Right, so this evening I'm going to talk about assisted sales and options. And last time when I spoke, I was talking about repossessions. Now I'm going to bring the repossessions in, but I'm not going to do the same presentation as I did last time, but I'm going to try and give you the whistle stop version of options, because assisted sales fits in with what an option is. I'm going to also share with you as I go through here, my alter ego is Batfink. If anybody wants to know what my nickname is Batfink. Small fears can take a bit of a beating, but might bite you if provoked. And I want to come back to this in a wee minute, because sometimes when people think of options, what they think is they think of going in with everything they've got to convince someone to do something, and then they wonder why the customer, the client at the other side, comes out as small and fierce and wants to bite you back. So I want you to think about Batfink and think about me when you think about this presentation, because this options and assisted sales within that kind of genre of alternative strategies is really useful, but it is not a universal panacea for everything. So in terms of what an option is, it's the ability to control an asset without owning it. Really simply put. Now, as I say, I could spend 4 hours just on the finer details of options. I could spend 6 weeks teaching you how to do them. But what I've tried to distill this down to is the key bits that you need to know. Why options are a really useful tool in your toolkit now as well as in the future, and how the pros use it. And I also want to cover basically how sometimes where it goes wrong, and you'll probably not be surprised to hear me say that the reason it goes wrong is it across 4 kind of key things that people get wrong when they attempt to do any kind of option deal. So if you remember nothing else, remember that an option is just that. It's the ability to control the asset without you necessarily owning the asset at the outset. So you will have heard people talk about buying for £1. Buying, you may have heard that. It was a very well-worn phrase when options used for residential property was being introduced into the UK, and that was about 2009, 2010, when options, certainly when I first heard about options being used against residential property. It was a nice little phrase about you buy a house for £1. But I want to stop people saying that, because a bit like Tina was saying earlier on, it's a great marketing phrase. It's lovely. You know, I just bought a house for £1. You haven't bought anything. You have acquired control of the asset for the consideration, and an option is you pay something. That thing is a consideration, and the consideration might be £1. Now I've put a wee link down here, and this is old news, but if you Google even last year, this gives you a link to some news stories where you will see big businesses being bought out, if you like, bought out for £1. In other words, being acquired for £1. And it's happened to a lot of very big high street names. So I've given you a wee link if you just want to go and have a look at those, and you'll get the idea that this isn't new. This has been around for a very, 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 very long time. But where options came into the UK, as I said, it was about 2009. So when you hear folks say about you learn how to buy a house for £1, you're not buying it. You are acquiring control of the asset for the consideration. And again, I'm going to say to you, it's not always £1. So the main difference is, even though there are tons of variations under these, the main difference in options is a purchase option and what would be called an exchange with delayed completion. Okay, so a purchase option, and you can actually do a lease without the opportunity to purchase. So there are lots and lots of variations, but I want to stick to the basics here tonight. Otherwise, I will be here all night. You'll be bored. But the main things that people talk about, they talk about PLOs, purchase lease options, or lease options. Again, if you have a purchase option, it means that you have the opportunity. So you've given a consideration. That may be £1, it could be more than that, but you've given a consideration to the owner of the asset for the opportunity for you to have the opportunity to buy that property at some point. Right now, and this is where it gets a wee bit technical. So you have the opportunity to buy it, but if all you have is an option, it doesn't mean you have to buy it. You could say, you've acquired control of a property for the next 5 years, and at the end of that 5 years decide it's not a property you actually want to purchase. So if you've had an option on it, you could basically hand that property back. I'll talk about paperwork in a wee minute. So where the lease bit comes in, some people have genuine lease options. So you may have a lease with an option to purchase, or you could have a lease without. Lots of rent to rent deals are effectively a lease option without the opportunity to purchase. But a lot of savvy guys doing rent to rent are renting with the potential, if that property takes off and it's a really good deal, to maybe buy it down the line. If I was putting money into a deal and I was wanting to make sure that I had got some leverage down the line because I realized that I was going to make some profit down the line, I would perhaps want to wrap a purchase element into the contract. But I'm going to talk to you about the main things you need to worry about. You don't have to remember every single bit of paperwork. I'm going to give you a couple of things that you need to remember so that it's easy for you, not necessarily to go and do one, but at least to understand the basics. And obviously I'm going to be running a room in a bit, so you can ask me. So it's the opportunity, but not necessarily the obligation to purchase. An exchange with delayed completion is there's an assumption, certainly there's an obligation up to a point for you to purchase. Exchange, an EDC or exchange with delayed completion, you've exchanged contracts on that property as you would do if you were buying it the normal way, which means you would have to pay stamp duty on it. You will have to do everything else you need to do other than completion. And the delayed completion can be, again, any time scale that you agree with the seller. So that's the main variations and differences. I am not going to say that there are not a million other variations, because the reasons that you use them, the strategy within using these two things, as long as you understand it's a purchase or an exchange with a delayed completion, that tends to be the main bits of paperwork. And then we work out the structure of the deal. And this is where most people lose their minds, because you get tangled up in, well, is this a purchase option or an EDC or whatever? And again, I'm going to hopefully simplify that so that you know how to decide which one you do, hopefully. So the main benefits of having what a lot of people call creative strategies is because if you are using options in the right way, in the right circumstances, you don't necessarily have to fish in the same pond as all the other investors out there who are sometimes scrabbling around for exactly the same deals. With an option, depending on how you set it up, you could potentially offer sellers more for their property than, and I don't want to use the word competitor because there is no competition, because we can collaborate, but you could potentially offer sellers more in the deal in return for more favorable terms to you. And again, I'll give you some examples in a little bit. So, but as a simple example right now, you could say, I'll give you £5,000 more over the next 18 months if you allow us to take the option on it rather than go and buy it outright right now. And that enables you to leverage potentially existing finance. It allows you to maybe spread some of your capital a bit further on a number of deals. It allows you potentially to scale because you're not necessarily having all of the purchase costs and all of the acquisition costs that you have when you do the normal, and I'm doing the air quotes here, the normal way of doing things. And potentially it lowers some of your entry costs, which again, you can either pass on in consideration with the seller, or it basically enables your profitability to be improved. So there are a lot of benefits of doing them, but only if you follow Trish's golden rule. And here's my golden rule. And I say this to everybody I've ever taught this strategy to, because I love assisted sales, and assisted sales are effectively an option. You have to use the right tool in the right place at the right time with the right intentions. And when I talk about repossessions and how this ties into this, that's what I want you to think about. It has to be the right tool at the right time in the right place with the right intentions behind it. So it's really important that just because you may have lower costs getting into one of these deals, and by the way, it depends on the size of the deal, that you are absolutely certain what you're going to do with it. But to give you some examples, here is a smattering of examples of the sorts of properties that I have done options on. This is a group of, this was 6 flats. Hopefully you can all see them. This is 6 flats. This is a semi-detached house. This doesn't look like much, but this was a little detached house that had been converted from an old garage. These were landlord properties. And right down the bottom here, this was my first proper option. This is a terrace house from a gentleman who was emigrating. And you can see, I mean, the numbers have to work depending on your exit, but you can use options to acquire control of a lot of properties. And then the creative, lovely bit comes out when you work out what your exit is going to be. And I know a lot of people out there say options are for those who are literally burnt out, broken, bitter. You know, they're guys with no money. They're guys who can't afford, you can't afford to get the capital together, or you can't raise finance. Maybe your credit's a bit bumpy and you're just coming in. Maybe you're a new business and you're trying to get started. Options can be useful to help you get started, but I would say what I've learned over the years since doing these since 2010 is you still need to know the basics. I have a set of rules that it's taken me a lot of tears, tantrums, and mess ups to create. And I'm sharing them with you tonight, but please don't break the rules, because the rules of using this strategy are in a lot of cases the same as using the rules for any kind of investment property you're going to do. Just because you might be able to do this using existing finance in place is not a reason for you to cut corners on your due diligence, and it's not a reason for you to cut corners on knowing what your numbers look like. So again, I'm going to cover that in a minute. But the one thing I will say is that options appeal to me very much. I'm quite a creative person. I love problem solving. It's how I came in to the whole repossession stuff, because if you've seen any of the previous EIP stuff, you will know I told the story of, in spite of the fact that I had a very successful consulting business, before that I was a mental health nurse. I had spent a lot of years in a senior role, and my relationship broke down, and I found myself, in spite of the fact that I had a very good job, one of those people who there was more month left at the end of the money. And I wished, I still say this, I wish I knew then what I now know, because I could have solved my own problem about sorting out my credit, sorting out the mess I was in. And I wish I knew what I know now. Because at the time, had I known there were ways for me to do options and stuff like that, I wouldn't have tried to hang myself, which is, it's no mean feat to say. Sometimes we use these strategies not just to enrich ourselves because it's clever and creative, but because it often buys you time to help other people, because you've got the tools that they desperately need. And that's why I love these so-called creative strategies. But the big guys are playing the same game. They're using these to acquire control of assets so that they can play around with what might be the exit. And in this case, I have used one of my favorite films, which is The Matrix. And the scene in there is Keanu Reeves being told by a little guru guy, there is no spoon. Because with options, it does give you some scope to be fairly creative with how you enter a deal, how you put a deal together, and how you exit. But again, you still have to know the basics. So there is no spoon, which confuses some people, but there are some principles which you can follow. So let me talk to you about where you make money on option deals. It's usually to do with cash flow. You acquire control of a property for a consideration. Again, that consideration doesn't have to be a pound. That consideration could be like a rent-to-rent deal. If you have an option to purchase it, you might pay a month up front and 3 months rent. But the cash flow that comes out of that deal when you've turned it into an SA is so good, it is worthwhile you doing that. So again, if you're using an option to purchase it, you might say, I want to be able to purchase this property in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. But an option is only as long as you decide it needs to be. In assisted sales, we don't make cash flow. What we do is we make the second bit, which is capital. And if you use an assisted sale, for example, in a repossession scenario, imagine yourself speaking to someone who's about to be repossessed. They have no idea how they're going to solve the problem. You suggest that you could bring your capital to help sort the arrears situation out. But you know that the property may sell for a bit more if a bit of work's done to it, and you wrap what I call, it is an option, but it's a joint venture. I set these up as joint ventures, but it basically is an option, but it's short term. You are in and you are out of that deal fairly quickly. But in the same scenario, there's nothing to stop you having a consideration with the seller who they're going to move on anyway, and you take an option to acquire the property and you use it as a simple, straightforward rental property, because there's enough difference between the outgoings on it and what you can get for it. Or you do both. You basically add value to the house, you possibly rent it out in the meantime, and you've an end sale in mind. And options work equally well, whether you're doing land for development, whether you are taking a property and adding rooms or adding size, or doing whatever you want with it. And it works equally well whether you're doing commercial, residential, land, whatever. You can use options for all these things. But it really is down to you sitting down with the scenario that's in front of you and working out how you help the seller and how you decide how you're going to make your money and how much it's going to cost you to make the best of that opportunity. And the reality is, like any investment strategy, you've got to be thinking about the upsides as well as the downsides. You can't just say, hey, I'm just going to take an option on something, and ultimately, because I've not paid anything for it, it's not going to cost me as much. Because if you're doing a property that needs work, you might decide that you would take an option or you take an exchange on it because you know there's a big chunk of cash down the line. That means you're going to have more outgoings, but potentially, if you know you're going to add a lot of value to it later, as long as you're not taking borrowing, because you cannot take borrowing against a property you don't own. So don't think about this as, well, if I have the property in my control, I can now get lending against it. Yeah, I can't. So this is one of these things you've got to weigh up. If I put some money in today, that's my money on an option, am I going to use the money that I have now to make the best of the deal, and how long will that take? But again, think about a piece of land. A piece of land could be something that you say, I'm going to go and get planning permission on it. So I'm going to invest my money on getting the planning and getting the plans drawn and having a planning consultant to do all of that stuff. But I have an option on the property that the seller can't go somewhere else while we're doing all this work. So they're really, really useful tools in your toolkit. And as I say, they're being used by all of the big guys. Don't let anybody tell you that you must be broke if you're using options, because they're being used by Donald Trump is very famous for using options. Okay, so let me give you the key components. It starts with what's called the heads of terms, also called the heads of agreement. So HOT, HOA, heads of terms, because before you get anything drafted, and the red line on this is basically above the line, you take care of those bits. You take care of what the deal looks like. You take care of how much it costs. You take care of your due diligence. You take care of negotiating what fee, if anything, you're going to pay, because you will pay something. It's £1, £2, £20. You're going to pay the seller's move on costs. You're going to give the landowner £20,000 up front and 60 grand later. So the consideration does not have to be £1, but you take care of those bits. The heads of terms is the piece of paper that you pull together that specifies who is the buyer, who is the seller, what are the agreements that you have reached, and that goes on. A single sheet of paper is enough. And I have a little sample if any of you guys want to copy that, you're very welcome to have a copy of one. So it really is down to your skill to decide what goes in that heads of terms and what you're going to pay for this property. Because below the line, the actual contract, the contract, the option agreement, or even if you have an exchange with delayed completion, you then have agreements that wrap around that still give you the option to complete down the line. Where I've said there's a management agreement, all of the rest of the stuff your solicitor should handle. So the reason I'm simplifying this is not because I think anybody here is thick, but it's because we get wrapped up on the paperwork. And I say every time, unless you have got your seller on board, unless you have got the owner of this property on board, you'll never get to the point where you have to worry about the damn paperwork. So you do your job and allow your legal team to do theirs. You give them the outline of what you're planning to do with this property, how much you're going to pay, when you're going to pay it, if there are any specific terms and conditions that you have agreed with the seller. It could be something as simple that you make stage payments on a 6 monthly basis for the next 2 years. That can be an option. But then your solicitor goes away and they work out what paperwork. But generally speaking, this is what you get on a simple rental property. So in one of the examples that I've shown you, and a simple rental property, I agree that I will pay the seller £100,000 for that property over the next 5 years. In the meantime, I am going to pay them £1,000 for them for their for the consideration of taking the property on, but I'm going to rent the property out, and anything above the normal mortgage is mine to keep. That is a simple option agreement. Within that, you will often wrap around a management agreement, and you'll wrap around that a power of attorney. The reason you do that is because if the seller decides they want to try and take extra borrowing against the property, if you decide you want to sell the property on, if you decide there's something else you want to change, you need the power of attorney over the property so that you have got the authority to make the decisions. You don't have to keep going backwards and forwards to the seller. Obviously, if you have got money in a deal, if it's money in someone else's property, you need to protect yourself. So usually you will have some kind of restriction on the title. You'll have some other restriction that stops the seller, if necessary, going behind your back when you're paying their mortgage, or you've made a consideration with them and you've made some other payments, that stops them going somewhere else or trying to take extra borrowing against a property. I have seen that happen. Thankfully, it's never happened to me. And obviously, if you are doing the exchange with delayed completion, there will be all this exchange. The first bit of conveyancing will all happen at that front end. So again, you don't need to do that. That's what your legal team is there for. But basically speaking, if you're doing a checklist, you need to check off, has this happened? Are these things in place? And allow your damn legal team to do their thing. You do your bit, allow the legal boss to do their bit. So there are a couple of main things that you consider on a deal. And guess what? This is no different to you actually buying a property outright, putting all your money in, getting finance against it, and doing what you do. Number one, what's the price you're paying from the moment you walk into the deal? Forget about your end price and all that kind of stuff. If I could predict what's going to happen in the next 3 years, I'd be very rich, except we do know that there's still some financial trauma ahead. But if you decide on the price, that needs to be told. You need to tell your solicitor that's the price that we've agreed. Is that the price we're paying today, or is that the price we're paying in 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years? Obviously, you need to do your due diligence, what you believe the value is against that price now. And if you're going to add value to it, do you know whether or not you're going to add value given time and the current market and comparables? You got to do all of the work. Obviously, you will work out how much investment you need, not just to control the property, but also any income that you're going to derive from the property, what your expenses are going to be, what your holding costs will be, and indeed what your exit costs will be. You have to factor all this in before you even go and start looking at your paperwork. That needs to be factored in so you know your upsides and your downsides. And the last couple of bits is really about the timing at which you decide either to exercise your option or you decide to complete on the deal. And again, as with any investment, we've got to also think about there may be more than one exit from this deal. And in actual fact, if you're doing anything in any deal, but especially on options, please make sure you have run a few scenarios so that you are clear what your exit would be. An example of that would be that you've agreed a simple option on a property where you're going to buy it over 3 years. But in between now and the 3-year period, the property market dips, and you might decide if it dips below a certain level, you may have a trigger in the contract that you will pay the seller less, or that you are able to hand the keys back or whatever. The reality is, on an option deal, there is almost nothing stopping you handing the property back because it isn't yours. Whether I think that's a bit of a douche move, yeah, I do think it is. Because if you're doing your job right, you will know, you will have done all your due diligence, you will know what is happening with that property, and you will have other ways to maximize your income or maximize your profit in that deal. And if you're thinking ahead, you will have covered all those bases anyway. In order to get someone to do a lease option, as I said at the start, we don't get people to do options. We don't convince anybody to do anything. So the real secret about finding an opportunity that suits an option agreement is really about getting into the head of your client. So again, before we even talk about the sexy paperwork, before we talk about solicitors involved, before we talk about getting a sheet of paper out and get everybody to sign it, before we even talk about is the seller who they say that, you need to understand what is the client's real outcome. And again, it's really about, that's about your skill as a negotiator. And I think some people say, well, I'm not very good at sales. And all of the stuff that I do, all the stuff that I teach is not about sales. It is literally about understanding the problems and the challenge, and you bringing your A game to say, hey, we've got some solutions that might work. Can we run these past you? It's not a sales job. It is understanding completely that when you get this right, it is often surprising, even to me, that people, because they've not thought about what it is that you have to offer, they've never been asked to think about this stuff before, that sometimes it's enough to break a deadlock they've had. Estate agents, even though I've had an estate agency myself, estate agents have one blunt tool. It tends to be, if we haven't got the price right at the start and there are no inquiries, we keep dropping the price until it reaches the point when someone is prepared to take a punt on that property. But obviously that tends to disadvantage the seller, or it just frustrates the seller because they have time waster after time waster and deal after deal will just fall over. So if you do anything with options, start with your client's outcome in mind, because by default, if you can deliver what they want and you use these strategies, you can deliver on what you want as well. I thought I'd throw in a wee bit of lead generation here. I have a little model. Where do people find guys who are doing options? Well, if you write this on your little whiteboard on your phone or otherwise, there are 5 key areas that you can be working on that will help you generate inquiries, not specifically for options, but will help you get people talking to you. And I call it leads. Funny enough, it's my little model. It's leads. L is for landlords. You should be speaking to other landlords. There are lots of landlords right now. Some of them are accidental landlords because of the whole COVID situation. Some of them are landlords who have had a nightmare renting out during COVID. Some of them are HMO owners. Some of them are commercial property owners, and they are ready to exit the market right now. So talk to landlords, get familiar. Here we have a lovely group. There's landlords in this group. Talk to landlords, start networking with other investors, start networking with people who have properties, and talk to them about the problems and the challenges they have and what their ideal scenario looks like. Estate agents, there's no point in trying to work around them. You can try it, but the reality is a lot of people in a traditional sense will go to an agent first. You don't have to network with every agent in town. You don't have to be on the books of every agent in town. But if you have a good relationship with 1 or 2 or 3 key agents in your locality, and they understand that you're not trying to get an option off everybody, they understand the benefit of it, and they understand how you work, and you invest relationship building, you will find estate agents are very happy to work with you. But again, stop asking them, have you any options? I get guys saying this every time. Oh, how do I convince an agent to do this? Well, stop trying to do that. Talk to them about business. Estate agents want paying, but please don't insult them by saying, well, of course we're going to pay you, because it sounds like a bribe. No one wants that. Then there's advertising and marketing. And advertising and marketing, again, I'm going to show you the example. Advertising and marketing needs to be short and sweet and punchy. And it needs to grab people's attention. And an awful lot of stuff that I see that's out there is adverts. Now, I do mean offline, a lot of offline adverts, direct to seller adverts, but a lot of it's really boring. A lot of it doesn't really grab your attention, and it doesn't sell the benefit either. It's all about, here's my lovely logo, and we've been working for 40 years. And the reality is most people don't care how long you've been around. They just care about the solution. Direct to seller is as simple as setting up in your area, the areas in particular you're interested in. It may be, again, it might be a particular area, maybe a number of streets. And I use some simple, very quirky marketing. I'm a quirky type of person. And I often send nice, friendly little letters with things stuffed in them. And it's amazing how many people want to talk because they're mildly amused at what you sent them. But again, this is also about follow-up. And then there's social media. We can't ignore social media. It's an amazing tool to do this, but please look at your networks, nurture your network of people, look at social media, look at social networks, and talk to other people who are in the market sourcing. They may have opportunities that aren't right for them, that are good for you. 90%, I would say, of my referrals come through literally by word of mouth and because I invest a lot of time in my network. But let me give you an example. So I thought I'd try and cram as much in and then I'll shop. Here is one of my little postcards. And it's not the only one, and it's not the most quirky I've got, but if you have some things in your marketing, whether it's online or offline, there are 4 key things you should have. Number 1, it should grab attention. Number two, it should pique your interest. Number three, there should be a desire, something your ideal customer wants. In other words, they want a sale. In this case, this one says, we will buy your house. And it does say fast completion. And number four, how do you get the result? So the desire is, this is what you can have. And number four is, this is how you get it. If all you do, again, tonight is take those four things down and apply that to your marketing, go and have a look at your own marketing and go, does it really grab attention? Is it really clear that someone would be interested in reading the next line? Because if they don't want to read the next line or turn the damn thing over, you've already lost 80% of the people that you could be doing interest with. So again, just to throw that in to bit of help. Now, let me talk about the horror stories. I did say in time for Halloween, and I'm not really sure what I'm doing for time here, Claire, so please, shut me up. I can summarize the real horror stories where it goes wrong into these four things. Number one is the paperwork. The paperwork is not fit for purpose. Everybody wants to know, can you give me a sample of an option agreement? The answer is yes, I can. I can sell you one, but I would still say you need to check that it is fit for what you need. And the best person to give you that advice is a solicitor. So a heads of terms is not a legal document. It is literally just an outline of something you've agreed, which the solicitor then makes legal. But if anybody wants some copies of paperwork, you can have it. So get the paperwork right for the job you are doing, and don't try and half-ass it by going cheap on your paperwork. What is the point of going cheap on some paperwork or cheap on some really good legal advice when you're now going to put some money into a deal and you wonder why it falls over later, especially if you don't have proper control of that asset? Because you could be putting a lot of money into someone else's property to find later down the line they're going bankrupt, which overturns your agreement with them, or could overturn your agreement. There's a lot of stuff you've got to do to get that paperwork right and to do the right due diligence. Again, if everybody wants some checklists, very welcome to have it. Profits. It is not just because you're acquiring it maybe with less money going in. And as I say, you're not acquiring every property with less money going in. I've done some deals where I've put substantial amount of money into the deal up front. It's just I haven't bought it outright and financed the rest. But there are times when you take the decision that it's not right for you to take an option on it. So for example, if you're going to borrow some money against it, you need to borrow some money against the property, unless the seller is going to also finance that bit of it, you're basically going to have to go and get some lending. And you can only do that on an asset you own in this context. So you need to do your profits. You need to know what your profits look like. And in particular, cash flow has killed many a deal. So I always say, if you can afford to cash flow a thing that needs cash flow for 6 months, you need to factor that in. It's amazing how many people don't, because they think options are a way to buy everything for £1, and they're not. And I just hate that scenario. Make sure your entry point is really well cleared. So you might say, again, on an option, for example, on land, that your entry point will be the agreement this week, and it may take 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, however, depending on the size of the deal, for you to get the next bit, which makes it worthwhile you then closing on the deal. So know at what point you are triggering certain things within that option, including your exits, because just because someone says we take an option on a deal for 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 years, whatever it is, you might have trigger points. And actually in some of the contracts that I have specific triggers that I've introduced because of my experience of doing these, because you learn the hard way sometimes. So know your entry and be really clear on your exits. So your planned exit is number one, but also anything incidental. So when you look at your risk on that deal, not just to your cash flow, but to any capital you put in, what the future market is doing. If the market changes, it may completely change what your exit point is, but plan that and talk about that at the start, not halfway through when you think, oh my God, I really need to get out of this deal. And sadly, as Tina's talking about sourcers, why Tina and I gel so well together, because I've seen guys saying, I'm only interested in sourcing options, or I'm only interested in sourcing rent-to-rent deals, or I'm only interested in sourcing, and that's fine. It does not absolve you from doing some really robust due diligence. And if you are buying from a sourcer, it does not absolve you from taking the sourcer's information and redoing the due diligence. It really is up to you, but we want to make sure people are protected. So let me tie this in just last, and this is literally my last bit, into how this fits into what I do. You will see this little logo down here, and although I've been doing the stuff that I do for years and years and years, I came into options partly because of my own scenario, and because as I've done options, I became by accident, not by design, I became by accident a specialist in repossessions. Because when we hit the financial crisis, I was dealing with a lot of properties in negative equity. I was dealing with a lot of family breakdown, and I could see in every seller, I could see me in every seller I came across. And I did not want to carry on doing what I'd been taught to do as a buy-to-let investor, which is get the biggest discount you possibly can and bugger everybody else. Because using options, you can cut people a better deal. And that's why it fits beautifully in with assisted sales and why it fits in with what I do in repossessions. But as a result of this network, God bless all of you, and especially Claire and Bryn for making this happen, and the lovely Christy for recommending me here. But literally in the last few months, we have set up under the banner of Repossession Rescue three new parts that enable us to do more of this. So it's not just about options and it's not just about assisted sales, but to actually concentrate on sellers, including investors who are sellers, that need to offload their properties in a way that supports where they're at. And born out of the experience that I have, we have, and literally the company has only just been formed, but we have got 3 levels of membership, but we want people to come on board. If you care about this and you want to do more options and do it right with the right people, within Repossession Rescue, we have a thing called the pledge. And the pledge is not stopping you guys making profit. It is actually preserving your profit while making you feel really good and wholesome about working with sellers who are distressed, financially distressed sellers. And I'll be telling you more about that. I'm not going to spend a load of time on it tonight because, we want a network. But there are 3 levels of pledge. There's supporter, partner, and ambassador. And wrapped around what we are doing is Repossession Rescue and doing the options and assisted sales within that. Is a real estate investment trust. And the real estate investment trust is the bank. Like Tina, I had a vision. I wanted to save more than one person. And I literally was doing it one home at a time. And I know if we widen this out to investors like yourselves who are listening, who care about people and care about making profit ethically, then this is something I want you guys to be aware of, because we will use the real estate investment trust. If you've got deals that you can't buy, then the real estate investment trust will. If you've got option deals that you need some support with, then we will help you to do those. They will sit outside the real estate investment trust, but you need to work with us in a way that ensures that you treat those customers who are distressed in a way that supports their mental health, because this isn't just about their money. It literally is about their mental health, whilst you still make a profit and feel good. So Repossession Rescue is brand new. It is hot off the press. We are launching officially, although we're launching officially next week. If you want to find out more about it, I'm in the room later on. I'll put this slide back up, but you can go and you can register your interest to either be part of what we're doing, and we will be sending referrals to people that we trust. So as we get referrals that don't fit the REIT, we will give you referrals, we will give you leads, but you must be trained and trusted. And thankfully, Jonathan is here with TrustMix and Tina's here with NAPSA. And they are part of our ambassador level of the pledge, and I'm really grateful to them for coming on board with that. So Repossession Rescue, if you want to go and have a look at that, there's a little opt-in if you want to find out more. You don't have to do anything other than that. And we've got a new business page and Facebook page and all that kind of stuff. So that's all happening right now. And I say, if you want to find out more about training, I'm not going to do the whole big training thing. I do have a quick thing about options. I do have something about repossessions. I do have something about assisted sales. But again, it's probably better to come into the room and have a chat with me, and I will give you the best steer that I can. Hopefully, Claire, that's all right. Can I stop sharing now?
That's brilliant. Yeah, Claire, can you?
Am I back in the room? Back in the room.
To stop the recording.